China exists in a communist and a democratic flavor. The Communist China, also known as the People's Republic of China, has a GDP per capita of $12,700. Meanwhile, the Democratic China, also known as the Republic of China or Taiwan, has a GDP per capita of, drumroll please, $32,679. That is twice as much. Considering the two were once at the same starting point, how come one is the 14th richest country in the world? In this video, we break down how Taiwan went from being one of the poorest to one of the richest. So let's get started.
This is the BBC Home Service. We're interrupting programs to make the following announcement.
The year is 1945 and World War II has just ended. Japan has lost its control in China. Right away, there are two different factions that had their eyes on the price of seizing control of China: the Communist Party and the Chinese Nationalist Party, also known as KMT. Keep in mind, these two had paused their civil war that had originally started in 1927, and it was on pause from 1937 to 1945. Pretty much the whole extent of the Japanese occupation of China, the war was on a pause. However, once the Japanese had left, peace didn't last very long. Within a year, a civil war had started again. By 1949, it was clear that the communists had won, and the Nationalist Party was forced to retreat onto an island by the name of Taiwan. This led to a situation where there were two Chinas: People's Republic of China with control over the mainland China, and the Republic of China with control over Taiwan. And of course, both claimed that the rest of the China was theirs to rule and would love to one day attack the other part and take it over. With that in the backdrop, on December 8th, 1949, Taipei was declared the capital of Republic of China in exile. The island was put under a martial law under this guy, who served as the president from 1950 to 1975 when he died, making him an autocrat, to be honest. From the get-go, the government faced two big challenges. One, the infrastructure was in rough shape due to the bombing that had occurred during the World War II. And second, when KMT moved onto the island, the population grew by about 15%, which further stressed the island's resources. The cards were really stacked against them. So how did the country go from being broke to one of the richest today? The KMT government from the get-go realized that they need to strengthen the nation on this island and make it self-reliant, especially if they were going to stand a chance against the Communist China's inevitable war, which may happen any day. One of the issues that needed to be addressed was the food supply and the condition of farming. This was rectified through land reforms and land redistribution policies. You see, before the reforms were introduced, a select few people owned big amounts of land and charged a lot in the form of rent or lease to the rest of the farmers. These rents were so high that these farmers were left with just enough to feed their families, let alone focus on increasing the yield or learning new farming methods. As part of the land redistribution, the land was taken from the wealthy few elites and given to small landholders and tenant farmers. At the same time, the small farmers were educated on better farming techniques. This more equitable distribution led to a boost in productivity, and more of the rural communities were lifted out of poverty. Since the farmers were now making more from their land, they had means to move towards mechanization, improved irrigation techniques, and crop diversification. It wasn't just the farmers that were being educated during the first decade of existence. Education was being prioritized across the board. Universal education was expanded from elementary education to high school education to ensure a basic level of literacy was attained. The land reforms had set up a base for the country to develop on, but the economic troubles weren't just over yet. In the 1950s, Taiwan suffered from a chronic shortage of foreign exchange. Imagine Taiwan as a person who wants to buy things from other countries. And to do that, they would need foreign currencies like US dollars or Japanese yen. Since they didn't have enough foreign exchange, buying necessary things was proving very difficult. As a result, the government took a few steps like putting limit on how much foreign currency people could get, or setting different exchange rates for different transactions. And worst of all, extra charges were added if you imported anything, which, as you can imagine, would make setting up manufacturing in the country very hard. Further, it also made almost impossible for any foreign direct investment to make its way into the country. Once again, after struggling for almost a decade, in 1958, Taiwan changed its course based on the ideas presented by two economists who advocated for a new foreign exchange regime. They proposed a devaluation of the currency and a market-based system for foreign exchange allocation. This proposal was embraced by a high-level policymaker by the name of K.Y. Yin, who overcame strong opposition within the government to implement these reforms. And there were many reasons for the government to be opposed to these plans. You gotta keep in mind, if this new policy didn't work, Taiwan might find itself in a worse off situation than ever before. However, the devaluation of Taiwan's currency allowed the exports to take off, and coupled with the improvements in the investment climate, propelled Taiwan's economic growth. All of a sudden, Taiwan was turning into a manufacturing hub. All of this made it a strong export-based economy, improving the living conditions within the country. Based on Trieste, a free port in Italy, the export processing zone was opened in March of 1965. Firms that were operating within EPZ were exempt from paying duties on materials and components used in goods that were produced for exporting. Basically, EPZ program attracted substantial foreign investment from multinational corporations across the globe. Exports and imports as a share of GDP soared after the mid-1960s. The government introduced tax subsidies, low-interest loans, and tariff protection, focusing on sectors where it had a competitive edge. And these included industries like textiles, plastics, electronics, machinery, and petrochemicals. By nurturing these industries, Taiwan really wanted to capture a larger share of the domestic and international markets. Through the 1960s, Taiwan was on the right track. Their economy was growing faster than ever before. More people had more money than ever before. However, this brings us to the 1970s, the decade where a lot was changing for Taiwan. Their long-term authoritarian leader, Chiang Kai-shek, was dead. This was happening at the same time when the rest of the world was pulling back their support for the Chinese government in exile, or Taiwan, and were officially acknowledging the mainland Chinese government. On top of all of this, as the living standards are going up and up for the Taiwanese people, the labor starts to get expensive, taking away the competitive edge Taiwan once had. The government responded to this change by establishing ITRI in 1973. With the purpose of finding new industries to take Taiwan to the future, where it's less reliant on labor force. The goal from here on was to move Taiwanese industries up the value chain and produce higher quality goods with greater added value. Collaboration between the government's agencies and universities and research institutes and private enterprises is something the rest of the world should learn from. ITRI further had 10 labs, including ERSO under it. The labs were tasked with carrying out R&D and they were funded by the government. But they were private entities in some sense. Even though they were government funded, there was very little government involvement which allowed these labs to be efficient. For example, ERSO contacted RCA in America in 1975 and got the contract of building 3-inch wafers. For years, the government decided to double down on creating this as an industry. In 1980, United Microelectronics Corporation, or also known as UMC, was established as a spin-off of the government-sponsored ITRI. Since the private sector or the venture capital scene in the country was still risk-averse, the government decided to give the initial funding. But once again, the government didn't try to run the company, and later on sold all its stock in the company. A similar story can be noticed with TSMC, a company you probably know of today. They are one of the biggest semiconductor manufacturers in the world. In 1987, the government had to fund 49% of the company because there just wasn't enough capital. Philips, the company, put another 35% of the initial investment. This success of TSMC is what really kickstarted the semiconductor revolution in Taiwan. ITRI and its affiliated labs played a pivotal role in driving research and development initiatives, particularly in the semiconductor sector. And as a result, Taiwan is now home to some of the biggest semiconductor companies across the globe. The semiconductor boom really helped the country from 1975 to pretty much 1995. But just around 1990s, when the cost of manufacturing was going higher in Taiwan, China started emerging as a formidable competitor, offering a vast market, lower labor costs, and increasingly sophisticated infrastructure. All of the things the semiconductor industry needed. Many of the Taiwanese companies recognized the strategic advantage of just relocating across the sea in mainland China, where they could tap into the new opportunities and remain competitive in the global market. While Taiwan continues to maintain its competitive edge in certain high-tech industries, particularly semiconductors and electronics, the outward movement of manufacturing has prompted a need for diversification. Once again, the Taiwanese government and policymakers were looking at a new challenge in the 21st century. And that's exactly what Taiwanese government has been doing for the last 20 years. Taiwan has strategically positioned itself as a hub for innovation and research, leveraging its skilled workforce. At the same time, the government has prioritized making Taiwan as business-friendly as possible to foster entrepreneurship and technological advancements. Today, Taiwan's economy has diversified beyond traditional manufacturing with a growing focus on services including finance, healthcare, tourism, and digital technologies. Despite all the challenges that were brought ahead because of the companies leaving Taiwan, Taiwan has remained resilient and has adapted to its strengths in innovation and human capital. They've always made sure that their policies are adapting as the needs of the world change. The story of how Taiwan became one of the richest countries is one full of turns and twists. Basically, the country was always adapting and reacting to how the situation across the world changed. In a future where it seems very likely that China will attack Taiwan, since China's been gaining all this strength, we'll have to see how the economy and the country reacts to that, and how many friends and foes it still has left around. I mean, America talks the big talk, but God knows if they'll show up. Anyways, that's it for this video. I'll see you next time. Peace. Bye.